Hey Mixer, Graham here from therecordingrevolution.com, and this is a video series. It's going to show you all the basics of how to mix a song using a variety of Waves plugins. And in this video, I want to show you how to take all your guitars, synths, keyboards, pianos, things like that, mid-range instruments, and give them more clarity and more excitement in the mix so they don't get buried. They actually jump out of the speaker a little bit more while staying musical and having a good balance. Now, this is the bread and butter of a mix because this is filling up most of our sessions. There could be so many instruments. And right here I have in this session a couple of acoustic guitars, about 6 electric guitars, a piano, arpeggiated synth, a bass synth, syncopated synth, a couple of pad type things, a wobbly bass, all kinds of crazy stuff. And they all sound cool by themselves, but can they play nice together? That's the key. So what I want to do is give you a little taste of how to make every track have its own space so you can hear everything beautifully. Here we are now with just sort of the bass, drums, and now the mid-range instruments. So that's what I'm working on right now, and they sound cool by themselves, and they're well recorded, well arranged, but we need to make them have a little more clarity because sometimes they're getting lost in the mix. And I'm going to start with the acoustic guitars because these really drive the rhythm of the song. They introduce the song at the beginning, and they are consistent throughout. They're the one consistent instrument. Not a bad recording, but a little lifeless. And what I want to do generally with acoustic guitars is grab some EQ. So here's the Renaissance EQ, again, kind of my go-to. And you're going to see 3 moves that I do on acoustic guitars almost every time. One is a high-pass filter. This is a simple roll-off EQ that rolls off some low end. It's the same thing as a low cut. So I've rolled off up to 50. This could go a little higher, but there wasn't too much low end on this acoustic. I've also taken out a little bit at around 245. It sounded a little woofy on the acoustic. Take a listen to this. So it really kind of cleans up that acoustic. And then a little bit of a boost here at around between 7 and 8K brings a little bit of the clarity of the acoustic back. So if I turn these off, take a listen to what these EQs do. It's the same EQ on the left and the right. It's just going to bring out a little more clarity and clean up the acoustics a bit. The acoustics already sound a bit wider, ironically. It's pretty cool. Then what I love to do with acoustic guitars, and this is a good way to go, is compression. You don't want to squash your acoustic guitars. What you want to do is actually bring them out a bit more in the mix. So actually using a compressor with a slow attack time and faster release can do this for you. So I've got the Renaissance compressor. This is a great all-around compressor, and I grabbed this one because it gives me more control than, say, the Renaissance Axe. I can control the release time and the attack time as well as the ratio, and this is really, really smart. So I've got a slower attack, around 30 milliseconds, faster release. This will allow all the plucking and strumming of the acoustic to still come through, but then I can still compress it and move it a little bit more forward. Take a listen to what this compression setting does on both acoustics. Subtle, but it brings them out a little bit more in the mix, which is nice. So far the acoustics are already coming together better. On the electric guitars, they didn't do much, but there's one lead guitar in the chorus, and it happens here. And that guitar on the right, it sounds cool, but it will get lost in the mix without some compression. What I like to do is bring up the sustain, much like we did with the bass in the other video, is I want to bring up those little tails on that lead part so that none of it gets lost. I don't want to just hear the initial pick. I want to hear the whole lead part. So here's Renaissance Axe, just a little simple setting. I actually picked a preset called Sustained, and it's just dialed in the threshold a bit. Take a listen to what this does. It allows everything to be a little fuller, which is great. So simple compression there can make a big difference. Now let's zero in on the piano. The piano is sort of the main instrument on this song. And while it sounds nice, it sounds a bit flat. So I grabbed the SSL-E channel because this just sounds super sweet on sampled pianos. I don't know if this is a sample or a real piano, but a lot of times I'm getting sampled pianos and they sound good, except for the top end is usually lacking. And so that's something to consider. What I'm using this for is a little bit of a high pass, roll off some low end. That'll free up room for the bass and the kick. And then I've scooped out a little bit around 760 that sounded a little bit wonky. And then what I've really done is then boosted some clarity at around 3.5K. This, in my mind, opens up some of the realism of the piano. And then I've done a little bit of compression, about 3 to 6 dB of gain reduction. So what I want to do is show you what this sounds like. Take a listen to how the piano cleans up, jumps out of the speaker a little bit more, and sounds more realistic. Very subtle, but very, very nice. Now, much like with sampled pianos, sampled synths can be a problem. They can sound great by themselves, but get lost in a mix. Take a listen to this one. This is a really cool sound, and it's very, very interesting in this song in particular. But in the mix, I felt like it was getting lost a little bit. So what I grabbed was one of the coolest plugins I've used. It's the red Abbey Road consoles, and this is a very, very vintage console emulation. What I like about it is the top end. The top end on this channel strip kind of plugin, this vintage EQ, sounds so sweet, especially on sampled instruments. So what I've done is simply run the tone high as it will go. Just cranked up the high tone on this thing, and then I turned the output down a little bit. I don't want to make the synth louder. I just want to enhance the top end with this very analog, vintagey sounding EQ. Take a listen to what this does. Do you hear that top end? That's what's going to be missing in the mix. When you bring this into the mix, I want you to hear this. You can hear how this synth, when I take it away, it's going to disappear a little bit. Take a listen. It disappears almost entirely when I take away the red, because that upper stuff that we're hearing is what allows us to feel the texture of that synth. So it's very, very important if you have a really cool textured synths to make sure the top end is right, and the red is a great way to get there. And finally, one of the sidechain synths, I've got a really simple compression EQ setting going on here. First thing I have going on here is some compression. I really wanted to make this pump a little bit more, so I'm using the Renaissance compressor. Subtle, but it pushes this out a little bit more into my face. And I'm following that up with some EQ, the Renaissance EQ. Rolling off low end that doesn't need to be there. And then I found just the sweet spot where in this synth, when listening to it in context with the rest of the instruments, makes it cut through nicely. And I think that sounded good at right around just under 1,000, 1K. This is 971. Take a listen. Subtle move, but it's a sweet spot that really in the mix made it cut through. So this is the proof in the pudding. Let's take a listen to all these instruments in the mix, and I'll take away all the plugins we put on them, and you can hear what happens to them as they disappear a little bit, and when you bring the plugins back in, they have a little bit more clarity, a little bit more depth and life, and they stick out nicely in the mix. or subtly enhancing it, making the mix a little bit wider, letting the instruments cut through a lot nicer. Now that's it for this video. In the next one, I'm going to show you how to get your vocals to have that upfront mix ready sound. You don't want to miss this.